interview series. Take a load off from your busy workday and listen to the dulcet tunes of our guests, who are all over the cybersecurity landscape. We're going to ask them some hard questions, not going to lie, probably some softballs too. But no matter what, it's going to be a good time. So sit back, pour yourself a nice hot cup of coffee, or something stronger if it's that time of day, and enjoy Coffee Talk with Serge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge, the interview series. My name is David Bianco, and I'm a researcher here with Serge. Joining me today is my good friend, Cat Self, who is a principal adversary emulation engineer at Mitre, as well as being the attack frameworks lead for both macOS and Linux platforms. Hope I got all that right again. Hi, Kat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. I think the most grateful thing I am is to be here with you because we go way back, and I just love our friendship.
We do. Kat and I have, for the benefit of everyone else in the world, Kat and I have known each other for, I don't know, several years now. We used to work together at one of our previous employers, which I'm pretty sure we'll talk about. So I guess to kick everything off, tell me first, what does a principal adversary emulation engineer do?
Everyone, that's such a mouthful. It's like just drop the level. Like, who cares if it's a lead or a principal? The adversary emulation is probably the most important part out of the sandwich of words. It's the middle contents that matter. Where basically my focus is you understanding what adversaries are doing. And then since I'm an engineer, usually I'll do one of two things. I'll either use that research to be able to update Mitre attack, or I'll use that research to be able to recreate malware that we can then use for testing. So let's say you're like, well, I think I can defend against like lockpick ransomware, but can I? And like, this is where you would have like an adversary emulation engineer go in, like pull in the open source reporting, pull in the binaries and try to understand what's going on, then recreate the software so you can test it in this safe way where you're not running real malware. And you can like have your breakpoints and make sure you're catching the behaviors as they're happening.
Okay. And is that related at all to, I know that Mitre puts out the emulation plans, the adversary emulation plans. That sounds like it must be part of that.
Yeah, there's the neat thing about Mitre is that you can kind of choose your own adventure. And as you know, like from my adventures at Target, I love like dabbling in all the little things. And so with Mitre attack, with Mitre, I get to be able to have the opportunity to be a steward on the Mitre attack knowledge base, where I get to specifically update macOS and Linux techniques. And then I also get to be a maintainer of the adversary emulation library, where we're actually going through and curating and making sure that those resources are available for people. But I'm also on the attack evaluations team, where I'm one of the developers that'll call in for macOS specialties.
So actually, that gives me another question then. If you are focused more on macOS and Linux for like the frameworks and the evaluation side, do you also maintain that focus when you're doing the adversary emulation, like the malware pieces or whatever, or do you more general?
No, I can't stand Windows. It's one reason why I specialized. I absolutely loathe Windows.
And how long have you been at Mitre?
I think it's coming up. I think I just celebrated 3 years.
3 years. Wow.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that long.
It does.
I remember when you left to go over there, and it just does not seem that long.
I know. Mitre snatched me away, and it was so funny because they literally offered me the description of this job where it's like, hey, do you want to go switch from red teaming to go write malware that actually helps defenders defend against stuff? And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's amazing. Who would say no to that?
So say a little bit more about that. Like I think like that's an interesting phrase, like writing malware that helps defenders. How does that actually work?
So you remember when we were on the threat hunting team together, and we would do these really cool hunts. And so for some of this background, David and I would organize these hunts and we'd come up with a hypothesis. David taught me how to be able to like come up with a hypothesis and a playbook and all this stuff. And then what we would do is we would run our hunt, but sometimes when we had availability for the red team, we would have them kind of run a known example of the behavior that we were hunting. And what this did was it caused a known bad. So we knew that if we didn't detect this behavior, something was off. There was missing telemetry, there was missing behaviors, there was something that was missing, there was a gap to be identified. So we were focused on the right problem. And that's kind of where this comes in. It's like if I'm developing software, we're going to call it software because malware is only when it's maliciously used, right? So you could even coin a phrase of like, no, I can't come up with anything catchier.
Emulated malware or something. Yes.
Emuware. And so when you come up with this intentionally, you've kind of given yourself a known bad. And so now you know, like, for example, in attack evaluations, like we focused really hard one time on Windows for create remote thread. Like there's a specific method of process injection that certain adversaries use that we're like, you should absolutely be able to detect on this or at least have visibility into the telemetry, which a lot of times is the name of the game. You can't detect until you can see it. And so that's kind of where this comes in. It's that known bad.
So when you're creating new not malware,
not
new
malware.
benign malware, do you usually do like threat actor tools that only interact locally with the system, or are you like making new command and control kind of remote access deals and things like that as well?
Dokoi. So we use both. We use if they're known to use open source tools. Like I did a Black Hat talk with Kate Esprit, who is just one of my favorite people. Like you would love her. Where we kind of went over how when we emulate an adversary, we found out that they've been known to use this open source rat. And then we saw that they actually used pieces of code from that same repo in other tools that they had. So they were kind of what we call, at least I like to call, I can't say other people like to call it, but what I like to call like duct tape and bubble gumming code together. And so they kind of like pulled some pieces out of these open source repos and popped it into their custom tooling. So it kind of depends on the adversary, right? Like emulation, simulation is where I'm just going to try to create the behavior. Let's say I want to start a service. So on macOS, I'm going to go install a launch agent or a launch daemon, right? But if I'm doing it like the adversary, then it's going to be with the specific process tree that the adversary uses. I'm going to put the very specific file. If it's a link file, I'm going to use a link file. If it's you have to use plist in that case. But the point is, I'm going to be very specifically limited to actually what the adversary did versus just making it work, right? And so when you get to use open source tools, it makes it much easier for us as emulators. But that also gives you the gambit where I might be using open source tools, or I might be doing something where if it's like Russia or one of the more nation statey people, people,
right?
How do you refer with the noun? Then I'm going to be doing something way more custom, right? Because a lot of the times those nation state actors they'll drop 60 to 80 unique payloads in an operation, which is nuts. That's a lot of work.
So you said that if you're doing emulation, you're trying as much as possible to follow their actual techniques and maybe even procedures, right? But with, I don't know, known not malicious malware that you write. But if you are also then trying to emulate, like you just said, nation state people that that might be busting out new things, and maybe a lot of new things that you've ever seen before, does that mean that when you emulate them that you might also bust out something new? Or are you just more like you're simulating that part by just doing something that's not necessarily in their known playbook yet?
So
I'm not sure if that made any sense. Maybe.
No, it actually makes complete sense. It's a really valid question and point, actually. So why do you think Mitre attack is so adopted in the industry and so useful? Like, why do you
Oh,
think every company tries to incorporate it?
all right. This is the first for the Coffee Talk series where I get interviewed, right?
There's
No,
no
I mean,
wrong answer.
no, I think the biggest thing that helped attack come out was now we have a common catalog of things, and we can point to, hey, this is a certain technique or even a tactic, and this is what it means, and this is the way that all the ways that we've observed in wild that it has been performed, right?
Exactly. And so when you're asking that question, that last part that you said is the most important. The ways it's been observed. Because at the end of the day, if everything is important, nothing is important. Like they used to talk about that all the time at Target, where we're like, how do we prioritize this? Well, if everything's important, then nothing's important. And you're like, crap, I hate that saying, especially when it relates to my budget. But at the same time, it's like that's valid, right? So for that purpose, how do we prioritize what to throw out there? And I can't throw out something I don't even know about, but I can throw out something that's been observed. And a lot of times by the time something gets into attack, there's been a good amount of grace period there where we've had plenty of time to build detections off of published reporting. And so it's an opportunity for defenders, not necessarily like it's us not reaching for fruit on the top of the tree. It's us more like, let's clear the fruit at the bottom on the ground. Like we haven't even gotten to the tree yet. Like let's just take care of everything that's already currently fallen.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to switch up a little bit, especially because we've already talked about like the previous places that we've worked a few times. So, I mean, can you just tell me a little bit about your background? I mean, I know that you were a career switcher, so cybersecurity was not your first career. So I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about your I don't know, career journey. I always say I feel a little self-conscious when I say it like that, but I think it's really true. And especially like when you were thinking about switching careers, why did you choose cybersecurity?
Two loaded questions. Oh, they're all the reasons why I love you. It's because you always like give these really great questions.
We ask only the hardest questions on Coffee Talk with Serge.
Love it. So I would say there's a couple of answers to this, right? I have had like a very wayward career, a very broken road that has led me straight to here. I try to be a professional artist. I often joke about that, and every time I present, because it's like this such a random fact, where I used to go to the fairs and I'd like be painting and trying to sell my paintings.
And some of your art I've seen, and some of it even shows up occasionally in your presentations that you do and whatever. Like I think when you did Objective by the Sea, you had a piece in there too. So it's good. You were good. Your art is excellent.
It can be better. I've got like pictures, like all this. Anyways, it's a whole thing. Like you'll never be good in your mind, in your own mind's eye. You'll always be progressing because you always have that eye on the next technique that you're like, oh, I could be better here. But I think actually those two things, curiosity and just like trying to problem solve in creative ways. Like I think that is a skill of an artist where you're like, how do I build this? How do I do this? How do I create this? How do I transfer what's in my mind into reality? And then also the ability to constantly figure out how to be better in that regard. Like, what is it that I'm missing? And like, is this a skill I can learn, or is this something that I just have to kind of go through the process and then I'll learn afterwards, right? Like a tribal knowledge. So that definitely affected my wayward journey. I've been a stewardess on a yacht. I have been
I did not know that one.
right. Like I used to work on mega yachts, like 164-foot yacht. Like I was your cleaning lady. I was also, I mean, I was in the service industry forever. So, but when I kind of got to this point where I was like, I need a career. And so I read a lot of, I'm a very avid reader for sci-fi and pretty much anything ridiculous and not reality based. And so I was reading spy novels all the time. I'm like, I need to become a spy. And I was like, well, military intelligence makes complete sense. So I enlisted in the army. I was like, yeah, I'll go be a human intelligence collector. That sounds great. Little did I know that for the 20% of cool stuff that you do, the other 80% is landscaping work on base, at home, doing nothing. Like, no one tells you that when you join the army. I'm very, very good at edging now, and I refuse to do my own yard work. It's kind of hilarious. But that said, what led me into this career was when I got out of the army. I was I really loved that there was a purpose. Like, I was on missions where I was able to be that middle person in like preventing people from getting blown up. And that's a big deal. And I loved being able to have that impact, that what I did mattered and protected people. And that's kind of when I kind of realized I was a protector down deep inside. And so I was doing a contract with some special forces guys. And long story short, I was also doing open source research on potential threat groups to the energy sector. And I was talking with them. I'm like, oh, look at all this really cool stuff I've been collecting. And they're like, yeah, you're leaving a really massive digital footprint. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? They're like everybody can see who you are and what you're doing. Your IP address is not masked, like all of these things. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know so little. And like here I am trying to play and have fun and be like a kid in a playground, like doing all these things. And the reality is like there's certain things that I need to learn. There's certain skills that I need to have. And so that's when I switched my degree to computer science, specialized in cybersecurity. And then I got a job with Target. And then Target was what gave me my foundation in red teaming, hunting, and development.
Yeah, I was going to say your first job at Target, right? I guess was your first job in cybersecurity?
It was.
Was on their red team.
No, so I
Oh, no, you're
actually,
right.
yeah,
I,
it was a
I
pie
totally
team,
forgot. Yeah. You
which,
want to say a little bit about that?
yeah, so it's so funny because I joined the team, and for those of you that have ever joined teams, when it's like, no, like, imagine if you joined a team and they were given the task that no one else wanted. And then it also had like the visibility of the CISO. And that's kind of what what I came into. It was like, hey, go figure out how to gauge the security posture of development teams and do it in a way that they don't feel like burdened by it. And we were like, and then do it data driven. Like, let's just tack on some other random good industry fad words, like okay. And we failed hard on our first try. And then we scraped ourselves back up. And then I got to build out the algorithm for the Pi score to where it was like, okay, well, these different metrics we would be able to assess like participation in security programs. Here would be able to assess like these data points in this database would allow us to be able to assess like, did they close findings when they said they would, right? Like we learned these different tweaks of like how metrics drive behaviors and how that's a good and a bad thing. And then it wound up being really successful once we actually finally got it implemented, got a patent for it.
Your first patent.
My
Let's
first
say it that
patent.
way.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. It was like we literally took the job no one else wanted and then we made something good of it. And that I think is kind of what I built my career on. Like macOS is very ignored and like we like to pretend it doesn't really matter, but it does. And so I took that on as my specialty on the red team. And I was like, okay, well, none of you guys want macOS. None of you really want to learn this platform, so I'll take it. And then that kind of allowed me to be and blossom in my own little specialty and scope things down to make it manageable.
Okay, so the red team then was after that, right?
Yes. I got rejected from the pen test team. I might have cried in the bathroom on that one. And then
Fair laws.
it wound up being like there's this saying, it's rejection is divine intervention. I'm a firm believer of that now because like there's been a few too many times where it's like opportunities that I thought really should have worked out didn't. Like even my job at Target, I was expecting to go work for Department of Homeland Security when I left college, and they just kept dragging their feet, and it just never seemed to work out. And Target wound up being, I thought it was going to be one option of a few. It wound up being the only option. Thank God Target didn't know that. But like it wound up being such a blessing because I got to target, and then I got to meet Jen, who was my leader on that Pi team. And she was where, like, she's actually who I really reflect my leadership strategies now from. Because between her and Jody, because Jody was her mentor, there was this like incredible chain of women that were just powerhouses when it came to like discerning what the problem was, figuring out how to like bring people along in it, get the right people at the table at the right time, and then come up with like an actionable plan that would address the real problem, not the problem we thought it was.
Right. Well, all things that I think of when I think of you too, because I mean, that's, I mean, that's exactly what you do, what you did for our hunt teams, right? You were, you were like, okay, here's this problem, the root of this problem. Here's how we're, who we need to talk to. And I'm going to go out and talk to that person right now and see if we can get this solved. Like today, by end of business.
I was a little go-getter, huh? I was like, how can I get this off my plate now? Like, I don't like having the stress of impending doom.
Okay. So you were red team, and then at some point you decided you were going to leave the offensive security piece, at least for temporarily, right, and come over to work with me on the threat hunting team. You and I actually, in very real ways, built that threat hunting team together.
Yeah.
So, and you were there. I forgot. I forgot. But 2.5 years or something like that, right? Before you left and then went to Mitre.
Yeah. So, fun fact, I actually was only at Mitre like three, almost 4 years. I think 3.5 years. I'm sorry, Target.
Target, yeah.
Target, yeah, because I got there, I spent 1 year on the Pi team, and then was promoted, and then went to the red team. Spent 1 year on the red team, was promoted, and then went to the threat hunting team, and then spent a year at the threat hunting team, and then got snatched away by Mitre.
Only a year. I thought it was longer.
Right? With the amount of work that we did,
Yeah.
it was long. It was like, because what we did was, like, I got on the team, and then we got a lot of green lights to be able to just go, like, which I love, is that they would just go create something and then make it work. It was just really fishy success criteria.
You say fishy, I say encouraging success.
Yes, which during our
Flexible.
conversations, you would often reiterate, you're like, well, our bar of success is pretty open here. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. I need moments to be able to reassure myself I'm on the right path.
So eventually, yeah, you went over to Mitre. Did you start off? I guess you started off as the adversary emulation piece, right? And grew into the attack framework piece and the evaluation piece, or was it a different order?
Different order. So an attack, they kind of give you enough rope to hang, or sorry, I keep saying attack. Mitre, they give you enough rope to hang yourself. So if you over allocate your time, then it's kind of on you. So, and I, as you know, I'm like, ooh, if one candy is good, the entire bottle must be better, right? Or the entire box or carton. Like I
don't know how you get your candy delivered for Halloween, but mine usually does not come in a bottle. So
I was thinking of like
adult candy.
That's fair. That's fair. No, I didn't mean to bottle. Like I'm thinking of like the jars. Sorry, wrong English word. Especially for someone that doesn't even drink. I don't even know why I referenced the bottle. Just to make it confusing, right? That's just the ultimate goal. Check success. So I started off, 50% of my time was actually on attack evaluations. 50% was on Mitre attack, where I was taking over being a macOS and Linux lead. Both of them had hardcore learning curves. There's this, I don't know where I heard it from, so I can't even cite it anymore. I just keep repeating it, so it must be mine now. And it's where when you start a job, you get about 3 months of being a beginner. You just don't know. Like you're asking beginner questions. Like, where is the documentation on this? Like, what does this actually mean? How do I turn it on? Right? Like these very beginner questions where you're like, why isn't this working? But then I want to say like, really even after 6 months, that's when you kind of move into the practitioner phase. I'm actually wondering if you told me this. Let me know if it's you, because then I'm going to credit you the rest of the time. But 6 months, you move into the practitioner phase where your problem sets are no longer that of a beginner. You already know how it kind of works. You know how to get to where you need to get, but you're now dealing with the sticky points, right? That you only get to experience when you're kind of in the job day in and day out. And then after about a year, however long that looks for you, you move into kind of more of the mastery phase where you're starting to be like, oh, if I do this, I know I'm going to run into these 3 sticky points. So how can I solve these 3 sticky points so I don't have to address them later, which creates a whole new set of problems, right? Because our best solutions tend to become our future problems. And then you're working through that. And so there's these different phases. And when I got into Mitre, I had those same phases on both teams. And so for Mitre Attack, I learned the weight of what being a steward looks like. And it's heavy. When people are reading your work and then using that as a reference for how to be able to speak about it in correct terms, that is really intimidating. You're like, oh, ooh, don't
Yeah.
tell me, don't like, oh, did I create an opportunity for confusion? I don't want to do that. And then you have the other one, right, where I was on attack evaluations. And of course, the thing that I really learned from being on the threat hunting team with you was the understanding of how much having outlined processes and clear documentation and really clear deliverables and criteria for like what does success look like, right? Because something that we faced later as our operational maturity increased was that annoying question of, well, so what? I hated that question every time they asked them. So what? What does this mean? So what? Like, give me the so what about this. And I was like, oh. So I was able to take all of those concepts and actually apply it to attack evaluations. And I actually built out a CTI team and then kind of just help them along that process, formalize things to kind of make it more easily digestible and create a space where we can bring people up, right? Because that was something that we faced on the threat hunting team. We were like, well, threat hunting is like up here. It's this high tier. How do we create this railroad that kind of allows my analogies? That has not changed. But how do we create this path where it's like a nice gradual climb versus like ice climbing up a waterfall, so something that's more accessible. And that's kind of what I did with the CTI team for tech evaluations when I first got on. And then I eventually, I want to say like 6 months later, finally moved into development, but I had to get that kind of squared away before I could actually move on to other work.
Okay. Now, when you're working as the what did you say, the steward of the macOS and Linux pieces of the framework, I know that has a lot to do with your interaction with the other people in the macOS and Linux security community, right? I mean, I've seen the videos of some of your presentations at like Objective by the Sea, which is a macOS focused kind of security conference. Also in like fabulous location. So what is it like to work with that community? I kind of imagine, especially in the macOS side, that it's smaller than the general cybersecurity community. A lot of people that focus on Windows and whatever. Do you find that that makes a difference? Is it like an advantage that it's a smaller community, or is it a disadvantage because there's fewer researchers, or am I just totally wrong about the entire thing?
You're not wrong about anything. We're just going to go with that.
I'm wrong about lots.
At the end of the day, I think for every industry, what really matters is the quality of people that are in it. You can have 2 quality people and it's a desert, but those 2 quality people will make more of a difference than 500 people that are just talking to talk. And in the macOS community, it is smaller, but the quality is very high and the culture is beautiful. Like it's probably, So Patrick Wardle, I will absolutely give hands down credit to for this because he has done a phenomenal job of cultivating an open source, a community driven, a very collaborative and diverse safe space for people to come and be able to talk about macOS. He saw that there was always like these scattered macOS tracks. he was like, well, this is ridiculous. Let's create our own conference focused on macOS. And then in cultivating that conference, he also cultivated the community. Apple has a lot of, how do I put this gracefully? Opportunities for improvement for information sharing. And rather than creating a very toxic relationship with the community, right? Because there's a lot of opportunity for some bitterness there. And there has been. A lot of the researchers have instead chosen to just use it as an opportunity to share knowledge. So they'll do their research and then they'll publish what they found for definitions of logs. Like Sarah Edwards does a great job with this. Armin from OSX Scripting, I think he just changed his domain to Mac Admins. A lot of these researchers, admins, or practitioners in security will actually just share. They just share, and that changes the atmosphere in and of itself. And I think that's what's cultivated macOS to be so special. And it's okay that it's a small community because it's really a niche within a niche, but it's like really great quality people that are very, very inviting.
Yeah, and I can tell that you're very enthusiastic about that community. I mean, not just from today, but from talking to you before, especially even when we were working together at Target and you were starting to get into there, like the Mac OS. I could see the Mac OS side of things just kind of like reach out of the screen and grab you and start pulling you in.
I love it. It's just like the best blend of like user interface in addition to like still being able to have the power of Linux. So like that's why I love macOS so much. I can be like a 5-year-old and like be like, why isn't it clicking when I touch it, right? Or I can be like a security person, be like, what crazy piped find command am I going to need to be able to find this very specific file?
Right. Well, as someone who regularly ignores the beautiful user interface in favor of the decades-old command line, I feel you. So I want to go back to one of the things we talked about a little bit before with the adversary emulation plans. So in case for those of you who might not be familiar, first of all, do you want to say a little bit about what the adversary emulation plans are and how people might use those?
Yeah, so they're all open source. If you go to like literally type in your Google foo adversary emulation library, GitHub, like you're gonna find it. It's underneath actually the CTID, which is like a research institute of minor Engenuity. And
the Center for Threat Informed Defense.
Yes.
Yes.
Acronyms. Oh. And flashbacks to the army. And the neat thing about them is what they are is well researched. It's like the adversary emulation library was supposed to be a way to provide red teamers a way to do adversary emulation, right? Red teaming tends to be more about simulation. And we wanted to be able to provide like, well, what if you wanted to scope it to a very specific threat? Like what if you wanted to be able to detect like specifically this adversary does it this way? So what does that look like in our environment? And we wanted to be able to provide actual examples of what this looks like. And so starting with, and then attack evaluations obviously is like one of our main funnels into that library. But we started with, I forget actually which one is the very first one, but there's like APT3, 29, Carbonac, Fin7. They're basically a bunch of different adversaries. And each adversary has kind of like an intelligence summary. It's got where it kind of gives you a summary of this adversary, what they usually go after. And then it also goes over different software that they've used. And it's coded software, right? So you actually have all of the software that we've tried to emulate there. And then you have like kind of like this outline of a plan, like, okay, well, they're going to start off with spear phishing. And since you have all the code, you can recreate this in your environment. And then you can kind of go play by play. We actually just released the OceanLotus one where it's macOS focused and actually also has a Linux component.
That's where I was going with this. Like, I think I'm not sure if this was the first of the emulation plans, but the earliest one that I saw was, I think, APT3 from 2017.
Yeah.
So without trying to sound too combative, like what took so long to make your first macOS and Linux adversary emulation?
Dude, you want to know the real story behind this?
Oh, I always want to know the real story.
So back in when I first started, and I was figuring out like, well, what does a macOS Linux lead look like? I was like, well, obviously I need to be involved in the community. And so I met this gentleman named Carlos who goes by Plug. And he's really big into the Blue Team Village at DEF CON. And he was like, well, hey, I want to do a workshop on macOS. And I was like, well, absolutely. I want to be involved. Like, I can update techniques. I can reference this. This is perfect.
I remember that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Our little baby workshop where baby Cat learned so much. And it was such a learning experience. And so we did this workshop, and then that was kind of it. And I was like, well, what if you wanted to go recreate this, right? Like all we had was like this data set and the plan. And that it wasn't even an executable plan. It was just kind of like the plan to hunt it, like the playbooks to hunt it. And we try to come up with the queries as well. And I was like, well, this doesn't feel like it's complete. 2 years later, it took me going to I was at an RSA conference, and I just happened to be talking with someone that was working at Kanji, and they were like, yeah, I actually worked with someone from AWS to get them two people. Like, this is how tiny the community is. 2 people.
How many were there? 3 people.
They worked like him. He was working at Kanji, and the other one was working at AWS, and they figured out how to get macOS into AWS instances. And so it was all based off of their work and collaboration. And I found out about this, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's really good to know. So now I know it's an option, because that came out, which was really the barriers. Like, well, what environment do we do this on? And then being able to talk with them and understand more about how they've configured the environment. A year passes, and then it's like, well, let's get macOS into attack evaluations. And they're like, well, we don't have the environment set up for that. Well, there is nothing for the vendors to be able to prepare against, right? Because attack evaluations, fun fact, that's ignore the fodder of marketing material that literally drives everyone to attack evaluations nuts. If you ignore all of that, it's actually a really big risk. Like, if you actually go to the vendors, the teams that are doing this work, it's actually a really big risk for them to be on attack evaluations because you're exposing everything. And so it's not very kind to be like, hey, we're going to drop an emulation plan, but we've given you nothing to be able to prepare yourselves for. We're just going to scorch earth and then release it publicly, right? Because that's what we do. We do a emulation plan, and then we release everything publicly, and then you decide for yourself. We try not to play the game of winners. Because to us, the fact that you even participated means you won, because you had the courage to actually get up there and be in the arena. So fast forward and however long then, finally, I actually created a research proposal, submitted it to CTID. They wound up funding it with their participants. And then I found a team, staffed it under budget because it was cut. And then
like all teams in cybersecurity, right?
God, all teams. Oh, it's even worse than the research. There's this thing in nonprofit where it's do more with less. And that's what we're going to give you a reputation based on. It's really silly. So which I'm sure every team suffers from it. So me and 2 other developers wound up developing this entire plan, a month shorter, 2 months shorter than what we thought we were going to have. And through that process, we only had 3 months to develop this, to include testing and research. So we're clear. So it was really a month for real development. And then it took our infrastructure team, and thank you, God, for such an incredible infrastructure team. We had M3, who was just Michael Butts, who was amazing. It took him the entire, I want to say a month and a half to navigate using an AWS instance and macOS with our InfoSec team. Every company's going to have, I only throw that out there because every company's going to have their obstacles that they have to face to implement these testing environments, right? Ours was, how do we do this in a secure fashion that's repeatable, blah, blah. And so it took them, we didn't even get access to our development environment until a week before everything was due. And so we had to do all of our testing. All of our development was local until that very last week. And then we're scrambling, trying to make the implants work with the C2. And you're just how do real malware developers do this? Like, this is nuts. Like, we need all hands on deck in these environments.
Are we hearing some sympathy for the malware
I
developers?
mean, there's just developer sympathy, all right? There's not necessarily malware developer sympathy.
Okay, because I was say that's like a Rolling Stones song, right? Sympathy for the malware developers.
Right? It would be. Oh man. But yeah, so it was a crazy shenanigans. Now that we have it out there, we also gave everybody our Terraform scripts and Ansible playbooks so that way they can spin it up on their own. So hopefully we've lowered the bar for entry on that one. But it was like, it took me this many years to get that out the door, and it was primarily community driven.
So once you had that, though, then you were able to start making some adversary emulation plans and releasing them. Then sounds like.
Well, yeah.
Do you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, we baked it in as a part of the research proposal. So that was the only way to do it. It was because there was no money to just fund figuring it out. So we had to figure it out while having a deliverable. And that's why it was such a chaotic summer for me.
But now that you got over that, now that you got over that big lump of work, can we expect to see more adversary emulation plans at some point from the macOS and Linux side?
None that have officially been approved yet.
Okay, secrets.
Sneaky question. But I really want to. Like, there's a lot. And like, so OceanLotus was actually the first one. And I'm actually trying to build this out. And you let me know if this falls on its face or not, or like what I could do better. Because you have been maintaining the threathunting.net forever. And
well, you say maintaining. That may be a little optimistic.
It's still alive, David. It's still alive. I still point people to it.
So, no, I think these kind of long-term like commitments, right? I mean, at least the good thing that it has going for it, I think, is that it's not just Cat's project, right? It's Mitre's project, and you have team members presumably that you can draw from, and the community. I mean, honestly, when I think of the pieces that most of us are familiar with day to day with Mitre, like around attack, especially, they're all very community oriented, community centric. They're active engagement by the community, feeding back stuff into the community for the benefit of the community. And I just want to say community a few more times, because I feel like I didn't say it enough yet.
It's like a drinking game. It's like,
right. Yeah, you'd be totally toasted if you drank, and like say community a few more times. Yeah, my favorite show. One of my favorite shows, Community.
yes,
Yeah,
it was
there we go.
That was a great show.
Well, anyway, Cat, I mean, we're coming up on a pretty good size interview here, and I don't want to keep everybody. But I really appreciate that you take the time to talk to us today. Always fun to get together with you and have a chat about security and stuff like that. Before we go, I just wanted to give you the chance, if you have anything that you would like to plug about your work or Mitre's work or really anything, now's the chance. Anything that you want to leave us with today?
I'd say a couple of things. One, if you want to contribute to the OceanLotus plan, there's plenty of opportunity, just as you were pointing out, right? It's community driven. So we're trying something different. If you go to the wiki for the Adversary Emulation Library, you'll see that like there's an entire like intelligence contribution. But if you want to submit code or anything, like make an issue, tag me in it. And my goal is to be able to create a really safe space for people to be able to learn and collaborate on this. So I definitely will plug that. And then also, I just kind of want to say thank you because David, you're kind of one of my favorite people. You're one of my first allies. I told you this at ATT&CK that like literally brought me to tears because you're just one of my first allies. And I love the work that you're doing. And I love seeing you thriving.
Oh, well, thanks. I was going to say the same thing about you. I love that you went on from threat hunting team, just went out and kind of exploded into Mitre and made yourself indispensable. Not like I ever thought that wouldn't happen, but it's nice to see it. So thank you very much again for being with us this week. So join us next week. We'll be back with our normal coffee talk format, and then because we do these interviews every 2 weeks, so we will have normal coffee talk next week and another interview with another InfoSec luminary in 2 weeks. And I hope you will join us for both of those. Thanks again, Kat, and thanks everyone for watching.